Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the Law Academy podcast. And in this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about the role of cryptocurrencies in the financial sector, as well as within commercial law. Now, I'll explain where this came from. This idea for a podcast episode came from in a minute, but I just want to remind everybody that the last episode we talked about the Ukraine crisis and international law and the role that international law will play in such a crisis. I'm sure we will definitely get back to discussing that in the future. So keep your eyes out in the recommendations to see more episodes on that. But specifically in this episode, the idea for this episode came from an article that I read, an article that came out, I believe, today or yesterday, and it's an article that relates to the announcement of a commercial law firm which has now begun the process of accepting payments for services in crypto assets. So the commercial law firm in question is called Gunnar Koch or Gunnar Cook, and it has become one of the first, not the actual first, but one of the first, and certainly one of the biggest law firms in the country to accept for payments and services in crypto assets. And this raises the question of the role that cryptocurrencies and crypto assets are going to play, not just in commercial law through the acceptance of payments and services through assets, for example, but within law more generally, because the regulation of cryptocurrencies, is something that has been very, very slow and really should be increasing at an increased rate, because there's a few issues that relate to this area of the law, this new area of the law that's definitely going to develop in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, before we begin and talk about the article itself, talk about the announcement by Gunnar Cook, and also talk about crypto, I think it's important that we know what cryptocurrencies are in their most basic form, because when none of us here I imagine, are computer scientists, so the actual complicated technical analysis of what cryptocurrencies are is not something that we're going to get into in this episode, because frankly life is too short. So crypto assets such as Bitcoin, for example, and mainly cryptocurrencies are what we're going to talk about in this episode, are described as digital or virtual currencies that are secured by cryptography. And the reason why they're secured by cryptography through a system of technology known as blockchain, which we'll talk about in a second, the reason why is because it's very, very difficult to hack. It's very, very difficult to counterfeit and to have any kind of double payment system that goes on. And so therefore it makes it almost more secure than regular currencies, because the issue of counterfeiting is relatively low when it comes to cryptocurrencies, because they're secured by cryptography methods. And so they operate on a decentralized network that's based on something called blockchain technology. Now, in its most simple form, if you were to do a Google definition, like what I did, blockchain technology is a system of recording information in a way that makes it very difficult or even impossible to change or to hack. And this obviously means it's very, very secure and could lend to the fact that cryptocurrencies could end up being quite secure in the future. And like I've said, this is not an episode about the science of blockchain. I'm not qualified to talk about the science of any of this stuff. So it's important that I just explain in the most basic definition and then move on and talk about something else. So back to the article that we were talking about. According to Gunnar Koch, or Gunnar Cook, they expect this method of payment to be popular with clients in the crypto assets sector, as you can probably imagine. And really, there are, like I've already mentioned, a number of different commercial law firms that are accepting cryptocurrencies as payment. However, these are a lot smaller law firms, and this is probably the biggest splash in terms of new policy relating to crypto assets from any commercial law firm, at least operating in the United Kingdom. Now, the financial director of Gunnar Koch has said that, quote, up to now, only a few US law firms allow for crypto asset payments, so we are proud to be at the forefront of innovation in the UK. We will now be able to work with a wider variety of clients across different jurisdictions, plus offer our partners the flexibility to be paid surely in a way that they choose. So ultimately, the reason for this seems to be to increase the ability for clients to pay their law firm, and to just give other avenues, especially when it comes to different companies that are working in different sectors, specifically crypto assets, the ability to operate through using cryptocurrencies. Now, this is obviously a good idea for a law firm, because a way to increase business would be to increase the methods and ability for certain businesses to facilitate transactions easier. And obviously, if they're wanting to get into and grow their presence in the crypto assets markets, then this is obviously a good method of doing so. Now, when it comes to the specific regulation of crypto assets and being accepted by commercial law firms, so specifically relating to the article in question, the Solicitors Regulation Authority have said they have no position on the payment of law firms in cryptocurrencies. So there's no specific rules that are outlined by the Solicitors Regulation Authority that say you have to be paid in something that isn't crypto assets or cryptocurrencies. At least from that standpoint, at least from the standpoint of law firms being able to and allowing themselves to accept these payments, at least from that standpoint, the use of crypto assets seems to be effectively deregulated or unregulated, and it's just a position that the Solicitors Regulation Authority don't choose to have an opinion on. So this article, really, all I wanted to do with this article was to simply outline the facts of what was being discussed in this article, but mainly to use it almost as a battering ram and talking about other things relating to cryptocurrencies, because it's a very new area of the law, and the law on cryptocurrencies is something that we should probably discuss. And there are a few things we need to take away beginning when it comes to the law on cryptocurrencies. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, cryptocurrencies are decentralized. So it means that there's no central authority or central body that controls any kind of the value of the assets, the ability to create more of the assets. Instead, this is seen as one of the key positive features, possible positive features of crypto assets. However, a consequence of it being decentralized is it's not regulated by this central authority, like a central bank would be in regard to normal financial instruments, normal currencies. Instead of this taking place, the value of cryptocurrency, you might ask, how does it gain its value? Where does the value of this new currency come from? Well, is ultimately dictated by demand, similar to any other kind of good or service. If it's a simple law of economics, a simple rule of economics, that if the demand for let's say the demand for an item increases, then that causes or allows for the person who is selling the item to charge a higher price, because if demand increases, then the willingness of consumers to pay for it will also increase. And subsequently as well, if supply decreases, then demand will also increase, subsequently increasing the price as well. So just like any other market, like a services market or a goods market, the cryptocurrency market and the crypto assets market is dictated by demand. Now, it should be noted that effectively anybody can create a cryptocurrency, and that's why we see some quite stupid cryptocurrencies that exist, things like Dogecoin, for example, and there are at least over 4,000 cryptocurrencies, and most of them, spoiler alert, are probably scams and or ways in which, or even just jokes or memes or whatever. And so therefore, there's something that needs to be regulated, and that's something that we'll talk about in a minute. Because at the time of recording, there are no specific pieces of legislation that relate to the governing of cryptocurrency assets. As I'll mention in a minute, there are certain things coming through the pipeline, certain announcements that have been made relating, at least tangentially, to the cryptocurrency market that are starting to become regulated. But in terms of actual cryptocurrency assets, there is no legislation that is governing this very unregulated market in the UK. So You might be wondering where the law comes from in that regard. You might be thinking, well, if there is no legislation and it seems to be a very unregulated area of the law, then where do we find any kind of law relating to it? And there's only really a few pieces of case law that have touched on this issue. Now, they are very, very few and far between, case law on crypto assets. However, they are actually quite substantial in some of the things that they have defined. And so really it begins by talking about some of the issues that are raised when it comes to the existence of cryptocurrencies. So firstly, one of the major issues that we have is whether or not we should define ownership of a cryptocurrency or a certain amount of cryptocurrency as ownership of certain property. Because in the UK, we look at two major classes of property. We say that there are things like we can own something in terms of possession, okay, and this can be split further if we're talking about land, for example. And then we also have things in action, which refers to the right that is capable of being enforced. Now, the question here is, where do cryptocurrencies fit in this calculus? Ultimately, they don't fall into either of these categories in any kind of nice, neat way. They seem to be something new. And really the way to get around this issue that the courts have adopted, they've had to adopt a stance coming from a statement that was published by the UK Jurisdictional Task Force from 2019. Now, the UK Jurisdictional Task Force in 2019 published a recommendation that even though on a strict definition of the law, cryptocurrencies and crypto assets can't really be viewed as property in possession, it is recommended that we view them as such for the purposes of regulation. So this is the first kind of legal introduction to the law of cryptocurrencies that we are starting to see here. And it was only in 2019, so you can see just how new this area of the law is. And all the cases are also really new as well. But this recommendation by the UK Jurisdictional Task Force seems to be something that has taken effect, at least in some of the case law, the case law that we've seen so far. And one of the key examples of this is the case of AA and Persons Unknown from 2000. Now, in this case, an insurer had brought, or at least issued or requested, a proprietary injunction to the courts in relation to bitcoins. So they wanted a proprietary injunction. And the reason why this was the case is because it was in response to one of the customers of the insurers being the victim of cyber extortion. Now, the facts of this particular extortion were quite simple. The customer had their computer system hacked, and the hackers had then subsequently encrypted this computer to the point where they couldn't obviously get into it. And so the extortionists demanded Bitcoin in ransom, and following negotiations, the insurers agreed to send over 109.25 Bitcoins. Now, back in the day when Bitcoin was very relatively new, 109.25 Bitcoins probably wasn't worth very, very much. But today, 109.25 Bitcoins is worth a lot of money. Now, around here it says around 900,000 US dollars. However, as we will talk about in a minute, the value of Bitcoin seems to be going up and down at quite a volatile rate. But 109.25 Bitcoins is a ridiculous amount of money. Now, just looking at the value of Bitcoin today, at this very moment, as at the time of recording, one Bitcoin is worth £28,525.80. So you can probably work out the maths about how much 109 and a quarter would be. And in exchange, the extortionists would give them decryption software to be able to decrypt the computer system. So this transaction took place. The extortionists got their Bitcoin, quite a lot of it, and in return, the computer system was decrypted. And following this transaction, the insurers decided to hire consultants to track the Bitcoin that was sent over, the ransom money, effectively. And some of it was dissipated, and some of it, which was 96 Bitcoin, remained in the account of the extortionists. And so we have a situation here where we've been extorted for a lot of money, a ransom was paid, and now we've got access and we've tracked the Bitcoin, the remaining Bitcoin into an account. And so therefore the insurers decided to get the law involved and bring about a proprietary injunction on the remaining Bitcoins, the remaining 96 Bitcoins. And it does raise a number of interesting questions, because when it comes to a proprietary injunction, ultimately one of the first requirements is that the injunction that we are requesting is actually on some kind of property. So otherwise you wouldn't issue a proprietary injunction. And the High Court had held that this proprietary injunction was appropriate in this regard, since all of the requirements for a proprietary injunction were satisfied in these circumstances. So they broke new ground in this case. They had definitively concluded that, at least in terms of English law, that cryptocurrencies can be viewed as, or at least constitute property within English law. And they had cited previous, well, there was another case here, B2C2 Limited and Qine PTC Limited. This was a case that also touched on the issue of whether or not cryptocurrencies were property, and similar decisions and similar conclusions were made. So the High Court here, in issuing this proprietary injunction, made it very, very clear that we can accept cryptocurrencies as a form of property. And so therefore, they can be subject to some of the law of property, even though we've still got a lot of regulation left to do. Okay, so this is the first step in terms of regulating, or at least creating a body of law around this very, very new area of financial transactions for a cryptocurrency market. Now, we still have some other issues that are related to cryptocurrency regulation, and as of this month, or at least I believe the last month, which is January 2022, the government has announced that it will be developing further rules specifically related not to the market of crypto assets itself or cryptocurrencies themselves, but to the advertising of crypto assets. So we're going to see some regulation into in terms of advertising crypto assets to avoid any kind of scams taking place. So while this isn't specifically related to the crypto assets market, it is still some kind of regulation tangentially related to it. But what's really important, and this is where I go from being descriptive to a lot more prescriptive, a lot more normative, talking about what we ought to be doing, is now talking about crypto asset regulation. Okay. So this entire podcast so far has been me talking about all the things that have taken place in terms of the law on cryptocurrencies, some of the cases on cryptocurrencies. But now it's important that we talk about some of the things that we should be doing looking to the future. Okay? Because it seems to be the case that cryptocurrencies are not going away. Now, some people argued that crypto assets were, for the most part, some kind of fad or some kind of meme or some kind of internet culture thing. But it seems to be the case that at least the big crypto assets, the big cryptocurrencies, things like Ethereum and Bitcoin, they seem to be here to stay, at least for a long time. And with this being the case, and with the fact that they're actually increasingly popular, they're also becoming increasingly popular with larger companies. Companies like Google and Coca-Cola and Tesla are all companies that have requested, or at least will allow for the transactions to take place using cryptocurrencies and crypto assets. Now, some have gone back and forth on this. I'll talk about Elon Musk in a minute, don't you worry. But we can see that big companies are very interested in exploring the world of crypto assets. So, what are the problems with crypto assets? What are the issues that we have? Well, first of all, we know that crypto assets are unregulated. It's an unregulated market, and with unregulated markets, it leaves the door open for potential scams and also financial crimes. Now, the biggest example of this, and the clearest example of this, is the gross development that has seemed to be taking place of what we call pump and dump schemes. Now, a pump and dump scheme is very, very simple. Let's try and think about an example of a pump and dump scheme within the context of the value of an ordinary company, a publicly traded company. So let's say some person decides to found and establish a company, and decide to make this company a public trading company, and so lists this company on a public exchange market. So, for example, the stock exchange, the London Stock Exchange. Now, what a pump and dump scheme effectively allows for somebody to do is to pump up the value of the stock of that company by increasing lots of different methods, increasing advertising, etc., getting people to buy into this company. And then when it gets to a sufficient height, the value of these stocks get to a sufficient height, the directors or the shareholders of this company decide to then dump all of their positions on that company and therefore make a ton of money. So if I was to create a company, or if I was to invest in a very, very small company where the stock was worth £1, I spend £100, and then in a year's time, that as a result of my actions, that company is then pumped up to £1,000 a share, then I can then dump all those shares and make £100,000. Now, in the ordinary regulation of securities and exchanges law, we see that pump and dump schemes are effectively illegal, and in most jurisdictions are completely illegal. However, within the crypto assets market, they're not illegal because they're unregulated, at least in England and Wales. So the problem we have here is that we can introduce a new cryptocurrency whenever we want. We can pump the value of that cryptocurrency up as much as we want in terms of using lots of different methods. And then when it gets to a sufficient height, we can then sell all of our positions in that crypto assets and then therefore make a ton of money and walk away from this. This has actually been seen and has been done before. Now, to avoid any kind of libel suit, I'm not going to name specific examples, but there are definitely examples of specifically social media figures and social media influencers introducing and creating new cryptocurrencies that their fans then invest in for whatever reasons, for them to then release their obligations by selling their positions and making a lot of money. So this is a problem that we need to fix, and it's a problem that regulation would fix. And just like where we can regulate pump and dump schemes and fraudulent financial transactions within ordinary financial markets and ordinary exchange markets, we can do the same thing in the crypto assets market as well. But this is just something that's going to require time for the law to actually catch up with the very, very quick or at least the speed at which crypto assets have developed in the last few years. Another issue that relates to crypto assets and cryptocurrencies is the volatile nature of these markets. Now, I have mentioned that we're going to talk about volatility. So one of the things that you want when you are trading, or at least when you are operating in currencies, is to have your markets be as least or less volatile as possible, to be the least volatile it could possibly be, because volatility of financial markets refers to the rate at which the value of certain instruments and certain currencies or certain trades go up and down. So a very, very volatile market might be one where the value of a stock or the value of bonds, for example, goes up very, very quickly and then goes down very, very quickly and then goes up and then down, etc., etc. This kind of volatility is not very, very good for financial security in any way, because it causes investors to panic, and it causes when things are low, which then decreases the value even more, and it also causes investors to panic when it comes to when transactions are particularly low, and they invest in the sector. And a very good example of this, that if you were to just type in the value of Bitcoin on Google, it will give you the market summary of Bitcoin. In terms of the volatility of Bitcoin as an example of a crypto assets, it's actually crazy, because Bitcoin, this is just one example. I think this is the highest drop in the shortest amount of time. On the 7th of May 2021, Bitcoin, a single Bitcoin was worth around £42,000. Quite a lot of money. Just 2 weeks later, it had gone from £42,000 to pounds, a significant drop. Even in a single day, the value of Bitcoin will increase and decrease by thousands. Okay, so one example here is if I'm scrolling here and we have a significant jump from 2:15 today. The time, the date I'm recording this is the 21st of February. So at 2:15 on the 21st of February, the value of Bitcoin was £27,730 and 14 pence. By just 5 minutes later, it had gone from £27,730 to £28,356 and 80 pence. So we had seen quite a significant increase in the value of Bitcoin in just 5 minutes at that point. And if we want to increase the time even more, by £3:15, it had gone up to £28,765. So in less than an hour, it had increased by £1,000. Earlier that day, it was as high as 29,000. Even as high as 29,000. So we can see that. Let's just accept it for what it is. Bitcoin is a relatively, or at least an incredibly volatile currency. And we know that volatility is not good for markets. And so therefore we have a problem here when it comes to the regulation of crypto assets by way of demand, especially very popular crypto assets like Bitcoin. Because if it's regulated by just demand, then it's hard to predict where it's going to go. And it's hard to predict how high or how low it's going to go in what particular time. That makes it incredibly volatile and makes it very, very difficult for speculation, etc., etc. Another issue, the final issue I'm going to talk about before the end, is the at least inadvertent engagement in market manipulation that can occur when it comes to crypto assets. Now, I'm going to use the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk, as an example of this, because he's probably the best example of the sheer lunacy that we can see when it comes to not explicitly market manipulation, because explicit market manipulation implies some level of intent on the part of Mr. Musk, but at least inadvertently engaging in market manipulation. Not intentionally doing it. Maybe he was, who knows, impossible to prove, but it was at least not intentional in the way that it was the way it was done. And we can see this in the value of Bitcoin again. We can see that the value of Bitcoin increases to near double in response to tweets by the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk. And as soon as I believe it was when Elon Musk announced that Tesla cars you were able to purchase them using Bitcoin. This increased the value of Bitcoin massively, and when things the opposite took place, the value of Bitcoin dropped and it sunk like a lead balloon. So we can see that at least a proof of concept exists here, where incredibly influential people such as the founder of Tesla and SpaceX can manipulate the markets to the point where they can double the value of a currency by simply tweeting about said currency. And such volatility in response to said tweets give people like Musk a lot of power within this market. They can do a lot with this kind of power. They can effectively double the value of a currency, or even when the currency is worth around £28,000 per Bitcoin, this becomes quite problematic. So we can see that the regulation of crypto assets is something that is quite important, and it's something that we will definitely see in the future. I've explained and I've outlined where the regulation has existed so far in terms of some of the case law relating to viewing crypto assets as forms of currency, and where the future will probably go in terms of the issues that will be at hand when it comes to things such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. So unregulated markets leading to financial crimes like pump and dump schemes, the volatility of markets causing a great amount of market instability, and also the ability for people to engage in financial markets. Now, some of these the solutions to some of these are quite simple. We've already been able to regulate things like the stocks markets of using by way of reducing pump and dump schemes by criminalizing or outlawing them, for example. And we can see that there are obviously methods to decrease the volatility of certain financial markets. However, one of the issues that we're going to run into when it comes to the crypto assets market is, how are we going to regulate the ability for people to engage in market manipulation? Because this runs into a free speech problem. Ultimately, if Elon Musk wants to tweet about Bitcoin, there seems to be prima facie no real reason why he shouldn't be able to do such a thing. But if somebody can do this and speak in such a way and use their free speech to effectively double or halve the value of potentially millions and millions and millions of pounds of assets, this could cause a real problem. And it could cause a problem that ultimately there aren't very many proper or at least satisfiable solutions. We'll have to look and see what the future holds in this regard. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, that we did talk about Ukraine crisis and international law, and this is obviously something that we're going to come back to in the next coming days, probably, because it is going to be quite vital the next few days what happens. So again, stay tuned in the news and stuff when it comes to this. In terms of future episodes, we've got a lot of things planned. We are going to be talking about the international law regulating private militaries. We can talk about the best way to study law as a more of a general revision or study episode. I want to talk about the future of international investment law, things like the WTO appellate body crisis, things about what happens when international companies go bankrupt. That'll be a very interesting one. And ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to start putting polls up at the start of the week, where we give a number of different suggestions and let people vote on what topic they want to see in the podcast of that week. So we can have a lot of direct interaction with the people who are listening to this podcast, and you actually get a say in the things that we're gonna discuss and talk about. So I hope that's very interesting, and I hope this episode has also been very interesting as well.